University Radio Nottingham.
Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. We're live on University Radio Nottingham. I'm Felix Hawes. Joining us today we have James.
Hello.
World-renowned, I should say. I apologise I didn't introduce you with your the esteem that you deserve. Joining us also is Ben.
Hello again, Felix.
And for the first time to The Big Picture, but no stranger to the University Radio Nottingham, Tom.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Thank you very much for coming on, particularly on a day where I know a lot of people are quite excited for the football match later after the show. But please do enjoy politics before we talk about football. Or just as exciting, if not more. So today we are talking about Baroness Mone and the COVID contract scandal over PPE. We will also be talking about the new coal mine opening in Copeland, and we'll also be talking about a failed German coup. But first of all, let's talk about the COVID contract scandal with Baroness Mone. So Michelle Mone, who was made a peer, that's a member of the House of Lords in, I think, 2015 by David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, she managed to procure for her company, and her husband's company, I think something like 100 million for COVID PPE equipment. But just under 30 million of that, it appears, has gone into her and her husband's pockets. And following this, and Rishi Sunak has said that he was absolutely shocked by this, and that she has left the House of Lords on a temporary basis, and therefore the Conservative whip has automatically been removed. And there is presumably an investigation into this. Matt Hancock, in his pandemic diaries, which are being serialised in the press at the moment, he claimed that he was bullied, I think, by Baroness Mone, into giving them COVID contracts. So what do we think to this? The whole coronavirus is going to be an inquiry into the whole government handling of it, of course, but there's been a lot of criticism already about the fast track of COVID contracts. Do you think that, what do you think to this story, basically? James, let's start with you.
Well, it's a bit of a mess. It is kind of I would wary to say out and out corruption, but it kind of is. The whole VIP lane at the start of the pandemic to try and get PPE by using companies with political connections, I think, is basically the definition of corruption, in my opinion. And so it's sort of no surprise that it's now come out that one of these VIP lanes was used to line the pockets of a Tory lord. So I don't think it's at all surprising. I think it's very bad, obviously, and very, very corrupt. I don't know what much else there is to say. I think it was bound to happen with this whole VIP lane of PPE companies that were trying to get contracts through their political connections. You know, Baroness Mone, I believe she recommended the company for PPE contracts, I believe 5 days before the company existed. So, and now she's trying to
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, now she's trying to claim, of course, that there was, both her and her husband were trying to claim that there is no connection between them and the company. But if you look at the investigation done into it, the money has just gone from account to offshore account in the Isle of Man into their own fund. So it is literally just stealing taxpayer money. Bound to happen, in my opinion. And I think it does sort of open up a wider question about Lords and the House of Lords in general. And I think why stuff like Gordon Brown's review into the whole House of Lords is necessary, because she has not voted, I believe, since April in any measures, and she has not been part of a debate in the House of Lords since March 2020. So I would hazard, what's the point in her being there? At this point, she is literally just a lobbyist, basically. A lobbyist that has, you know, the ability to see government ministers on a daily basis just because she was put there a few years ago. I think it's absurd, really.
Very well put, James. Ben, I imagine you probably agree with James's sentiment there.
Yes, I think he's hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think this is unrelated from the amount of money lost in COVID fraud, isn't it? how much was that? I think it was something like 7 billion, 8 billion. And then the
Mm.
mini budget has cost the UK 30 billion, and then up to 100 million here. So the government's talking about things we can't afford. I'm not sure we can afford this Tory government, to be honest. It's costing us a tremendous amount of money. No, I think he's absolutely right. It's Tory mates being handed out government contracts, and Baroness Mone does not seem to have much expertise in PP background. She has an interesting business career, but I wouldn't say it specialises in that. I think it's outrageous, and again, Baroness Mone sort of exposes the whole 12 years crooked deal this government has been selling us, put in there by David Cameron, this COVID loan fraud, not doing no proper role in the House of Lords. It's another example of this government not being able to afford to pay its nurses enough for them to avoid food banks, but is willing to pay hundreds of millions and billions of pounds to their mates.
Tom, do you disagree or agree with your fellow panelists here?
I think I'm gonna sit a little bit on the fence, in the sense that obviously this was clear corruption from the government in terms of giving money to those people who couldn't provide, the PPE and other equipment that was needed during COVID simply because they were their mates, obviously. But I will just say, the government's defence is obviously, we had to act quickly to, get this equipment. It was the height of COVID, stress, last minute, all these excuses. And, I guess there is some sentiment to that, in the sense that, obviously they're having to make these decisions really quickly. But there is, and I think people would excuse it, say, if money had been given to a actual PPE company and things had gone wrong, or if small amounts of money had been given to the wrong people. But when you look at the scale of the issue, and also the clear kind of the issue of it is this money was given to people who could never ever provide, the PPE equipment and other things that were needed. So I think I have to agree in the sense this government has clearly been, supporting its friends more than the people. But at the same time, we've seen in previous Labour governments also, many amounts of corruption, especially when we look at the public services. So I don't think this is, an exclusively a Conservative issue, but I do think it is an issue when you get these governments. You can tell they're on their last legs. I think it's pretty clear. The 2024 election, Labour's going to win it. By how much we don't know, but I think they're probably going to win it. The Tories know this, so they're just sort of piling in, don't really care anymore. They know they're going out. That's kind of my view.
Well, it's interesting. Tom mentions there that something that might be the government's line of defence is that this was the height of a pandemic, and that we needed PPE equipment, and it didn't really matter where it was from as long as we got it. Do you think that's a valid excuse, James, in the broader sense, even if on this occasion it clearly didn't quite go to plan? Or do you think that excuse doesn't quite work? Bearing in mind that the Labour opposition did recommend also many obscure and peculiar PPE providers that also weren't really PPE providers at the time as well.
Well, I do kind of agree that it's sort of an excuse that in the situation, where every day counts. If a minister or a lord is coming up to you saying that they have a company that they know could potentially get you the PPE, and it's suddenly it's become a race, as it was at the start of the pandemic. It was a race between all the countries to try and get as much PPE as possible. I can get that being an excuse that it was everyone was in a hurry, so you kind of didn't have the time to look through and verify everything. But I don't know, I think it would have been better to actually work with known firms. Again, this was a company that when it, I think, officially got the contract had existed for 3 or 4 weeks. It's not that doesn't take that much reviewing to see, hold on, something's a little bit dodgy here. I do agree that everyone's in a hurry, you're in a hurry to get the PPE, you don't really care where it's coming from, but I think there is still a base level of review and investigation that should have been done before they were given the contract for, I think it was actually 200 million. I think when you're throwing around that kind of money, you can still act in a hurry, but I think you also need to review that and continue to review that. Because again, why is it only just coming out now? Why has this only become a hassle, a big scandal, nearly 3 years after the start of the pandemic? So clearly there was no review at the time, and also since that point, the government has never looked into it and been like, hold on, something was a little bit dodgy here, like they didn't a year ago say, we've done some investigations, it turns out we were wrong. They've only revealed, this has only all come out because of, I think it was The Guardian's investigation into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Showing that the government not only didn't review it originally, but were just happy to never review it kind of thing, and never touch on it. So I do think there is a base level of review that should have been done on all these contracts, and I think even if there wasn't, there should have been reviews since that point that should have revealed the scandal before now, I guess.
Same question to you, Ben. Do you think that the excuse that this was unprecedented times, certainly in modern history, and that if someone was to come to you and say, look, I've got PPE equipment, and they could show some form of evidence, would you not think that's a valid excuse for the government to say, okay, yeah, we'll give you this? Do you think that's valid, or do you think, hang on, actually, no, this was just profiteering a couple of quite wealthy individuals, and there was they sort of were using this to their own advantage? What do you think?
Well, I suppose it is faster to ring up a bunch of your mates and ask them for something than to go through the proper channels. I think it is amazing how many of the PPE providers turned out to be friends of the Conservative government, or indeed in the House of Lords. Now, I would never go so far as to accuse the Tories of handing out contracts to their mates, or that might be the only reason they serve to be in power is to hand out contracts to their mates.
No, that doesn't sound like you, Ben, to say something like that.
Look, no country in the world will have spent that money 100% efficiently. I know America has spent eye-watering amounts of money on the pandemic, and some of that will be misplaced, no doubt. Same in the rest of the world. The issue is there isn't a chamber of government where people sit in other countries where they can be handed out these contracts. The whole thing just reeks of corruption. So I don't doubt that some money can be misplaced. I don't doubt that would have been necessary. Although this argument that, they were doing it because they were doing it quickly, well, they didn't go into lockdown very quickly. Not the first time, not the second time. And then on the third time, they let everyone back to school for a day and then went back into lockdown. So it's very convenient when they choose to be fast and when not to. And again, they weren't very fast in dropping their mini budget when their own supporters, the market, said, what on earth are you doing? This is a terrible idea. So it's a convenient use of an excuse. So no, I don't really buy that defence.
Fair enough. Tom, something you said earlier was about the whole end of days, that the government is aware that it's collapsing. Well, Baroness Mone was handed this contract by the government when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, 2 Prime Ministers ago, which is weird to think. Do you think that rather than this being a government at the end of days, this was just a representation of an ongoing problem that happened under Boris Johnson of rules not being followed properly, because he himself has been known to have broken at least a few rules, as he has been fined by the police?
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you that Boris Johnson does not follow rules, but I don't think that's an exclusive problem with him. I think that's a problem with the Conservative Party as a whole. I mean, you look at like Rishi Sunak and his wife and taxes. Lots of rules there being applied very liberally.
Well, the non-dom status is legal. It's obviously controversial, but it's there was nothing illegal done there.
No, but I guess my point is, like, I don't think that this was an exclusive issue to Boris Johnson. I think this is more an issue, as has been alluded to, with just the kind of corruption that flows through the party. But I think that the worst of it was probably done under Boris Johnson, given kind of his connections with Eton, and as you say, like the way that he, believed that the most important thing is just getting things done. Doesn't matter if you do them well, if you do them badly. You just want to get things done, and then hopefully the rest will follow. And I think with COVID we saw that, because if you look at the contract that was handed to Baroness Mone, in December 2020, BBC News reported that millions of medical gowns the firm supplied, which were worth 122 million, had never been used because they weren't up to the specifications of the NHS. So I feel like the government talks about wanting to do things quickly during COVID, and while that is important, I think also doing things well is also important when you're dealing with the pandemic, because you don't want to have faulty equipment, or you don't want to get things wrong in the short term that can then have worse long-term impacts. So I feel like their excuse of saying, it's got to speed is of the essence doesn't really hold up in this case.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, the COVID inquiry, which I think is going to be starting soon, will be very interesting to find out more about this sort of information and what exactly happened. Of course, Matt Hancock, as I mentioned earlier, is doing his version of events being serialised in the press at the moment. It'd be interesting to know how much of that is truth and how much of that is not. Just to remind our lovely listeners at home that you can message in if you're on the website. You can on below the where it says it's playing, you can type in and message the show. So please do if you would like, and we can read out your comments. We're going to go into a short music break now before we move on to our second topic. So enjoy another festive tune.
This year, URN are kicking off Christmas early.
From December 1st, we'll be giving away a prize every day as part of our 12 days of Earnless.
It's Christmas! Make sure you're following at URN1350 on Instagram to keep up to date with all the giveaways.
Hello and welcome back to The Big Picture. We are live on University Radio Nottingham. Our second topic of today is the coal mine. There's a new coal mine being opened in Copeland by the Conservative government, which is interesting, and Labour are opposing it, which you wouldn't have foreseen 30 or 40 years ago, that this might be the line of thinking of these parties. In fact, only very recently Ed Miliband, when he was the leader of the Labour Party, was supporting an opening of a coal mine or keeping a coal mine open. I can't remember which way around it was. But here we are, a new coal mine being opened. There was talks of this happening before, but it was postponed. But it is now being green-lit. It will be opened in Copeland. And this has received criticism from those that you'd expect, but also some Conservatives as well, such as our former well-renowned Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and the COP26 President Alex Sharma. And so the arguments in favour of it is it provides more energy and that it will provide some jobs, although not that many, about 500 jobs-ish. And it will help us when we have a crisis, obviously, with our resources because of what's going on with Russia. And it has been saying that it could provide us with more steel, though British Steel and Tata, if that's how you pronounce it, have said that they're actually moving away from coal, so it might not actually help. And they do think that about 85% of the coal being produced will be exported out of the country rather than being used here. So it's been given the go-ahead until 2049. So let's start with you, Tom, this time. What do you think about the reopening of the coal mine, and what does this say about Britain and its commitment to net zero by 2050?
I think personally it seems to me to be quite a backwards decision. I mean, we've seen with this recent Conservative government, they've been very they've actually switched to be very focused on the environment. So obviously they had the big COP26 conference in Glasgow, and there's been all this talk about net zero, reducing CO2 emissions, and then they do things like this. They're reopening a coal mine, which seems, in my mind, to be kind of the opposite of what you want to be doing to tackle issues with the climate. But obviously the line that they're going with is that, they want to create jobs. It's all about energy security. But then, as you said, they're going to be exporting 85%. So it's not really that much contribution to the energy supply, in the UK. And then it's okay, 500 jobs, that's a fair few, but is it really, a substantial amount to help with? I don't think at the moment people, if you look at the job market, there are more job openings than there are people applying. I don't think the availability of jobs is the issue. I think it's more, we're seeing wages are the main issue at the moment. And then if you look at it from a kind of a policy perspective, well, they say that, oh, well, we need to, increase energy supply, but they've had a ban on offshore wind for many, many years. So again, seems a bit strange that, they talked about, we want choice for local councils, whatever. I think most local people would much rather have some wind farms that, okay, they might look a bit ugly, but okay, they're not causing that much damage, rather than a massive coal mine, which you're literally digging up the earth to extract the material for. So I think, personally, it's the wrong decision to be taking at this time.
Ben, I'm assuming you probably also are not a massive fan of the fact that there's a coal mine opening. Is that right?
No, I'm not a fan, but it is an interesting, I think, focal point for many reasons. So it's an issue for me over which the ghost of Margaret Thatcher looms large. So, quick history lesson. So the coal mines were not shut down because they were uneconomic. They were shut down because they were a source of Labour support, and Margaret Thatcher wouldn't tolerate them. But the other reason, and now they're being reopened because that has disappeared as a source of Labour support, but the other reason why it's really interesting is because the reason why we are really struggling to be self-sufficient in energy is because of the slowness in building nuclear reactors and the slowness in providing nuclear energy. And that is an issue which both Conservative governments and the new Labour government were very slow to respond to and start building. But the reason for that was because the Margaret Thatcher doctrine of not providing public finance for anything, except the farmers who voted Conservative, loomed large over the Labour government, and they would refuse to provide public finance to help build nuclear reactors, which would provide us with being self-sufficient in energy. And that's something New Labour failed to do and the Conservatives have failed to do, and so now we have to go back to destroying the planet to be self-sufficient in energy, coal mining obviously being the worst form of energy production, even of the non-renewable kinds. But the reason why I think it's really interesting now is because Nigel Farage and Reform UK, which has been a growing force in the news in recent weeks, has very much staked its comeback on the net zero issue. Nigel Farage calling for a referendum on net zero. So it's interesting to see whether this is Rishi Sunak trying to counter that threat, because it's growing. So it's an interesting thing in many ways, but no, I think it's the wrong approach.
Of course, some do say, I think it was even Margaret Thatcher that said this, that if you stand in the middle of the traffic, you'll get hit by both sides. It's interesting points you make there, Ben. You mentioned farming. Of course, the Conservatives are turning their back on that recently as well. And though it is important to note that most coal mines were shut under Labour rather than the Conservatives, but obviously Thatcher was seen to be a figurehead in that, and of course did close many coal mines, and that has damaged many communities and created a sense of strong dislike for the Conservative Party that's lasted for quite a while, up until perhaps recently with 2019, when many of these old heartlands did start to vote Conservative. But we'll see if that remains. James, same question to you. What do you think?
Well, I had to say same answer, but as with the rest of the panel, I do agree that this coal mine is a bit stupid, in my opinion. If I was to
a bit stupid, we must quote. That's the tagline of today's show.
My intellectual opinion. I think both interesting points were brought up. I think Tom's point about unemployment is very interesting. Sure, it's creating 500 jobs, but as I said, unemployment is very low right now. The problem is low wages and like them just being like bad jobs as a whole. You know, again, nurses going to food banks and stuff, working such long shifts and not getting actually paid enough. You know, the problem isn't unemployment anymore, really. The problem is that the jobs themselves that are on offer are bad jobs. So adding 500 more jobs doesn't really solve the problem. It just kind of looks good. It's easy to package because people hear more jobs and they think, oh, that's good, you know, that'll help, you know. But like in the economic situation we're in reality, it doesn't really help. And I think the nuclear point is interesting as well, in that both Tory and Labour governments in the past have underfunded it to the point where, you know, we're not really prepared. And the problem with nuclear is, as far as I know, I'm not a nuclear scientist, of course, but
I thought you were.
I know, shocker. But as far as I know, nuclear reactors take quite a long time to get up and running.
About 10 years.
Yeah, about 10 years. So if we're really aiming for net zero by 2050, and potentially even aiming like better than that, which we kind of need to aim more ambitious than that. It's sort of too late for nuclear reactors, and we just kind of have to commit fully to renewables, in my opinion. So I do think the final point made by Ben, that it is just sort of, it could just be the government trying to appeal to that side of the population who normally vote Tory, who don't really care much about climate change and stuff. Like I said, the side that normally were always going to vote Tory, but now with Nigel Farage picking this as his battle, and the like growth of the, not climate denial, but because that's not as much of a thing in the UK, but sort of prioritising it a lot less than it really realistically should be. I think this is just the Tory government trying to shore up support from that right wing. And I think it was the exact same thing. I think I was discussing it just a few weeks ago on your show about the whole fracking unban. That it was just the same thing. It was just the Tory government trying to appeal to that side of the population who normally would always vote for them, who didn't care about climate change. So, why not do fracking? Why not open new coal mines? So I think realistically, that's all this is.
One of the interesting things you mentioned there, both you there, James, and Ben, about nuclear reactors and the point about how long it takes. Well, I believe it was the coalition government that were apprehensive, as many previous governments were, as you mentioned, Ben, didn't open any new nuclear or create any nuclear plants, nuclear reactors, is because it took so long that perhaps on a political perspective it actually wouldn't really benefit the government, because it could be another government that's in power by the time that it takes over. And I think that was a point actually that Nick Clegg made. I know probably quite a popular figure with everybody on the panel, Nick Clegg. Was that it takes so long. It's also opposed now by a lot of people on the environmental campaign, nuclear reactors, which is interesting because it seems to be a very divisive figure amongst those that are in favour of tackling climate change. Now, once more, it does appear, as I'm faced with a panel that are perhaps not necessarily very right wing, that I have to take the government line of thinking. The point being made is that in terms of emissions, the amount of emissions being emitted globally from this coal mine is very minimal, and that the benefits of getting more energy outweighs the very tiny amount of emissions that are being emitted. I imagine none of you think that is a valid excuse. But what do you think then we should be doing to tackle both our energy security, to improve our energy security, and also to work towards net zero? What do you think, James?
Well, renewables, basically, is my opinion on the matter. I think, like I said, I think it's too late to start committing to nuclear, because by the point you get enough reactors up and online, it'll be, kind of too late. Opening new coal mines and, that kind of thing is just walking backwards. I think renewables are sort of the only answer. And I do also think on the whole point that, the amount of emissions this will give compared to, the rest of the world is minimal. I mean, you could say that for any coal mine, any factory. Coal mines in China, they can just say, the individual impact of this specific coal mine will be quite low, so why can't we open it? That's sort of not the point. It's when you put everything together, we're destroying the planet. So I think this is just a step backwards. You gotta start going for renewables, really, like, a lot, in my opinion. And you have to also, at the same time, try and... This is a lot more ambitious. Try and start a greater global movement towards renewables, and which is very difficult to do, obviously. I think stuff like the COP summits have been complete failures in the past. But I think at the same time, we kind of need something like that. We need something like that to work, Eventually, we need some sort of actual agreement. Eventually, I just fear that by the point a real agreement will be made and where most of the world begins moving rapidly in the direction of renewables, I fear it'll probably be too late for the planet, but that's very pessimistic of me.
Again, not like you, James.
Yeah, I know.
Ben, you mentioned nuclear for you as something you think we should work towards. Tom, what do you think? What would you suggest?
I think, as has been said, I think nuclear could have been an option in the past, and I understand the apprehension at the time towards nuclear energy. The power plants have had a, shall we say, a long history of running into faults and that causing major issues. So I understand why the coalition government and previous governments were apprehensive about it. At the same time, as has been said, I don't want to be too repetitive, but as has been said, we don't have the time anymore to do nuclear. We have to focus on renewable. And I think we have to communicate that to the public, because we've got, some conservative councils and areas that say, oh, I don't want, onshore wind or this or this or that. And it's quite frustrating, because obviously you're thinking, well, would you much rather have like a coal power plant or some wind farms next to you? Because those are the options that we have at the moment. So it sort of feels, I feel like the government needs to take a hard line on that and say, no, we need to stop the ban on onshore wind. We need to increase renewables. But I think also there's an element of like focusing, when we think about the climate as a whole, there's a focus on like also reducing consumption. Because I feel like at the moment we live in quite a consumer and like quite short-term society, so everything's about getting the next thing, and kind of people are very focused on like the global supply chain and things like that. And I actually think to focus on, things like buying, say, more local food, as has been said, like the farming industry in UK is suffering, and I think it needs renewal, but I think it's something that consumers can also invest in, and that would do a world of good for the climate as well. So I think there's lots of paths the government can take, but I think the main one has to be, not opening new coal mines would probably be a good start, I'd say.
Well, there we are. Thank you very much, everybody. I just want to read a message that we've had come in from Jenny. Jenny is saying she's enjoying the show, but she is saying that James is making better points than me. So thank you very much for that, Jenny. And I'm sure James is thrilled. Thank you for listening, Jenny. And do feel free to message in. Anyone else, message in if you have any points to make. We're going to make have a second musical break now, and then we're back for our third and final topic of today.
University Radio Nottingham.
Hello and welcome back to The Big Picture. We're live on University Radio Nottingham with me, Felix Hawes. Our final topic is a failed coup in Germany. We're not talking about the 20th century here. We're talking about this week in Germany. This is actually very significant news in my humble opinion, though it's perhaps gone under the radar, but we'll talk about it on The Big Picture. Essentially, there was a huge operation which resulted in 25 people being arrested, though they do believe that there are many, many more people that could have been part of this coup. It was led by Heinrich the 13th, a minor aristocrat. This already sounds like a bit like some sort of film, but it's true. And they wanted to restore the Kaiser to Germany, the Second Reich. So we're talking First World War here, the German royal family. The members involved include judges, police officers, army officials. Heinrich the 13th was using his castle to store military equipment. I mean, we really are talking something from the past, but really actually no, it is now. So 25 people have been arrested. I think over 3,000 police officers were involved. Or was it 3,000 police officers were involved in the arrest across many of Germany's many states, and there were also arrests made in Italy and Austria. So that's 11 states, different states in Germany where people were arrested, and Austria and Italy. It's believed that the group that were planning this coup wanted the backing of the Kremlin. We don't quite know, or it's not been revealed to us, quite the extent that Russia was involved in this. I think it seems more likely that the group approached Russia rather than it being a Russian-sponsored thing initially. But the group were planning on storming the German parliament, arresting and killing its members, inspired by the Capitol 6 riots 6th of January Capitol riots in the US. So storming the German parliament, arresting them, where Heinrich the 13th would be proclaimed as head of state, potentially Kaiser, and or another one of the people involved in this was a former Alternative for Deutschland, the far-right party of Germany, also was involved in this. So it seems to be a huge operation. Obviously, it has been stopped by the German security forces. But one of the things that's come out of this is the involvement of QAnon and right-wing conspiracy theory websites, and that this is not now just a thing of, where individual groups of people are holding views which are dangerous, but the fact that they're actually now grouping together. And I forgot to mention that this group were not just trying to restore the German royal family, but they were also anti-Semitic and far right, which of course Germany does have a slight history of. So what do we make of this? I mean, this is pretty significant stuff. What do you reckon to this, Ben, about the coup? Is there a potential of other coups occurring elsewhere that we're obviously not aware of? And actually, how likely do you think this is to succeed? I mean, it would have been, had it not been stopped, to have succeeded. I mean, to the extent that this is a huge operation of many people being arrested. This is not like, let's say you and I, Ben, decided let's have a coup. It's not going to happen, is it? But this does appear that actually this could have happened. I mean, what do you reckon to all of this?
So, like you said, points for cinematic scope. Like this could make a tremendous movie in a few years. But no, you're quite right. It's far more serious than that. I think it's terrifying, frankly, because I think the best example of coups toppling democratic governments is Latin America. And the evidence there is once you lose the military, you're out. You're toast. And there were military figures involved in this. And this is the real thing that scares me here is QAnon, because this insane theory started in America and it shows it's spreading. It's spreading across the world. And so this has echoes of January 6th. Obviously, this is much more organised, much more scary in a way, because it's a concerted attempt by judges and German princes rather than the government. But it's the same sort of decision by members, radicalised members of the public, to actively try and overthrow democracy. And it's a pattern you're seeing across the world. I think it's extremely scary. I think we're very fortunate in Britain not to have had something similar. And I think it's a problem that's only going to grow and grow. And for me, the thing at the heart of it is these unregulated social media platforms that we have no idea what they're doing. And they're a real threat to our democracy, I believe, across the world, as this shows.
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, as Ben said, this is an incredibly worrying event to see in Germany. This kind of coup kind of playing out, and I think we do have to think seriously about social media and if these companies are responsible. We've seen, I know Facebook or Meta now is kind of a classic example of, we saw problems with, in the 2016 US election, we've seen problems elsewhere. There's always been this discussion around, social media influencing political events and causing conspiracies to kind of spread. And I think genuinely governments have to take a hard look and say to these companies, look, you have to sort this out, or we're going to have to start seriously regulating, because I don't think these kind of viewpoints, while they may come from a legitimate maybe disdain in the current government, or they may come from a feeling of being kind of underrepresented, this is clearly not the solution to those problems, So I think, the social media company, I think we are seeing some progress toward regulation. We're seeing in the US, the government is thinking more about big tech and how it's going to regulate that market. But I think things do have to kind of pick up in pace, or we're going to see more coups like this happen in the future. Possibly we're going to see more in Europe, which is incredibly worrying.
What do you think, James, to the comments already made and the general point? I mean, how likely is it that we're going to see more of these coups occurring, or trying to commit a coup?
Well, I don't think that there was ever a true worry that the coup would succeed, that this group of 50 people, or however many people were involved, would be able to storm the German parliament and execute the prime minister and all of that. I don't think that's realistic. But what is very realistic, and as has been said, very scary, is that sure, they weren't going to be able to successfully coup the government, but the terrorist capabilities that this kind of a group has is extremely. They were, had stockpiles of weapons prepared.
In a castle.
Yeah, in a castle. They were never going to be able to overthrow the German government, but the threat of terror is a very large one, and I think it is very worrying because this group themselves, I believe they were called the Patriotic Union, some random name.
A very
like that.
friendly name.
Sure, this was a group of a few hundred people, but they were a small part of a very large movement in Germany. I believe they call themselves Reichsbürger, which is like citizens of the Reich, who do not recognize the legitimacy of the German government. Exactly. So you have people proclaiming their own kingdom of Germany outside of the rule of the German government. And this movement has a mix of the whole sovereign citizen, I don't want to pay taxes kind of people, all the way to anti-Semitic, neo-Nazis, and even some that are so wacky that I've seen some neo-Nazis are saying that these people are quite crazy, which is very worrying when the neo-Nazis are calling you the crazy ones.
Well,
It's a bit like Alex Jones and Kanye West, where Alex Jones seemed like the sensible man on his show. It is worrying, isn't it? I don't know, what did you think? I mean, someone's messaged in saying, what do you think the long-term goal was? Because surely the international community wouldn't recognise them had they been successful. What do you think actually would have happened in a hypothetical world where this group of, yes, it wasn't many people, it could have been more than what we're being told, did manage to successfully overthrow the government with the help of the military and some aspects of the police? What do you think would have happened in the international community about in response to this? What do you think, Tom?
I think that's a really interesting question. So well done to whoever wrote that in. I would say that definitely they would not get recognised by the international community, but they would probably, I imagine, try and claw back power over the state. They'd probably have to use quite authoritarian regimes, I think, to keep order, given the nature of the coup. I think trying to relate it to an historical event, I guess we cast our minds back to the early 90s and the many kind of coups and changes in the Russian government. We saw kind of tanks going down the main streets. I think if there was to be a serious coup which was successful, we probably would see similar things in those countries, kind of the military and violence taking over. And I think the question would be kind of how long would it last? Because, if that's how you're governing people under fear, I think it's very unlikely that your regime will be long lasting. But I guess then you start thinking about how much of those changes they would actually enact. Would they instate a monarchy, for example? I think that would be it would be intriguing to see kind of what would happen there. I think also you see with these regimes, often when these leaders come into power, they often might find out they disagree on lots of things, or they might try and struggle to see who can be the true leader of that country. So again, I think if there was, you'd see the regime form under fear, controlling the citizens, and then I think most likely in the short term it would disintegrate quite quickly.
But the real, to me at least, obviously, aside from far right taking control of Germany, which is never does not have a good history, the real concern would be the implications for Ukraine. I mean, Germany is really, for me, the most interesting country in the Ukraine situation because it's so dependent on Russian gas. And it's hurting so significantly because of the implications of having to, on the one hand, take Russian oil, and on the other hand, call out their invasion of Ukraine. And it wouldn't be very difficult for me at all to see a coup taking over and then ending support for Ukraine. Even defending Russia, who knows? It's a melting pot with these people. So I think it's just a really scary moment to me because this is something which could well have succeeded in my view. And I think January 6th in America came far closer than most people realise. And this issue of these social media giants who go totally unregulated for the most part, the international community has to get a grip of this, otherwise you're going to see similar things happen, and any form of a coherent Western approach to basic rights is going to disintegrate in my view.
James, what do you think to Ukraine, the point that Ben makes there? bearing in mind one of the aspects we haven't really discussed is the fact that this group did try and woo over Russia to try and support them. What do you think would have happened there had Russia actually got perhaps a bit more involved?
I think even Russia would recognise that this group is not a group that would be able to take and hold on to government. I think it was in their plans that after they'd stormed the parliament, that the army would recognise the true moral path and join their side, which I think is completely unrealistic and delusional. But this is the problem: these groups are delusional. But when you get a group of all these people who are very delusional, all agreeing with themselves over and over again, you have January 6th. Like, realistically, they weren't gonna be able to overthrow the US government and then it'd be fine. However, at the same time, there was a real risk of a lot of US lawmakers. Like, they were in serious danger, and there would have been severe implications for years to come. I don't think that this group really had, or that this group's long-term plans really mattered, because they were just all deluded plans of QAnon people. I think it's sort of interesting to look at how this group, this QAnon group, the Reichsbürger movement in Germany, has sort of existed for quite a few years now, but then with the growth of QAnon and social media websites sort of, I guess, pushing these people into echo chambers, it's grown and grown and grown, and then COVID sort of became like the match that lit up a lot of these groups and pushed a lot more people into them, kind of thing, because of COVID disinformation, anti-vaccines, anti-lockdown rallies and stuff like that. All of these things has pushed people into this whole rabbit hole of QAnon, of Reichsberg, and you see that again from a group. I believe quite a few of the people who were implicated in this coup attempt were similar people who were. There was a plot foiled a few months ago that they were going to try and kidnap and execute the German health minister because of what he's been saying about COVID. So I think it is all extremely interlinked. This whole growth of this through social media, that COVID and anti-vaccine disinformation that has been allowed to flourish on social media has just made it a wildfire that's difficult to control. And I do think that regulation is a difficult thing to do, because how do you do it properly? How do you regulate a social media website to stop these sort of movements from occurring, while at the same time not, I hate to use the words hindering free speech, because I don't really buy that. But that is like an argument made that if you force these social media websites to regulate, then it is a threat to free speech. Again, I don't really agree. I think they should be regulated, but there is sort of a difficult balance that needs to be made, which I don't know how you can be made. As we talked about, I think January 6th a couple of weeks ago when I was on, and I think as I am always very pessimistic when it comes to politics, I think my worldview was that these social media websites need regulating. However, I think even if you do regulate them, it's sort of become a too big a problem for regulation to deal with, Much like the nuclear plants, If regulation was done 5 years ago, maybe we wouldn't be in the situation where QAnon and COVID disinformation was such a big thing. But now it's sort of, in a way, too late to stop the mass growth of these movements. And now we're ending up with these kind of plots,
Very interesting. And the involvement of social media and the effects it has is something perhaps we can talk about another time on the big picture, because it is a very potent topic on to many issues. But for now, I would like to thank our wonderful guests, Ben, Tom and James, for coming on today. I've been Felix Horse. This has been The Big Picture. I'd like to thank our regular listeners. I don't know quite who is listening today, but I'll say Lucy, Ollie, Amy and James from Beeston, Jenny, who's tuned in today, Ella, Sarah, Daniel and Isabel, George Scotland's aunt, my parents. Thank you all for tuning in. And to finish off, as it is almost time for England versus France, let's hope that there will be a repeat of this particular song.
No.